We have 4 weeks until the fantasy playoffs, and here are the rest of season rankings. Tier 1, I don't want to waste too much time on this. All right, I think we can all agree these are the elite running backs. Typically, you only have 1 or 2 of these guys every season. This season is insane. We have 8, including Barkley, Kyron, CMC, HN, Henry, Kamara, Bijan, Mixon. Now, if you wanted to go down there and scream at me and go, oh my gosh, Mason, I can't believe you have Bijan down at 7. He should be higher. Tell me who you put him ahead of. I mean, the issue is you just have 8 running backs that every single week, regardless of their matchups, will project out to have anywhere from 15 to 25 fantasy points. It's insane. Now, obviously, I will say that we are making this video before the Rams-Dolphins game. Obviously, I'll be live streaming after the game tonight to give you any official updates if anything does happen with Kyron or HN. And in that game as well, if you actually wanted to take advantage of a free pick over there on Underdog Fantasy, they have Matthew Stafford more than less than half a total yard for the Monday night game. You can get that free pick plus a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night. If you go over to Underdog Fantasy with the link in the description or comment section and use promo code FLOCK. Now let's move down to tier 2. Maybe this is where you can actually start to have some serious arguments. Jahmyr Gibbs will be a running back that I really want to put as a tier 1 option. The issue is, maybe we just haven't seen the same level of 20-point performances that you have from the tier 1 names, where technically you'd only have 20 points in 2 games for Jahmyr Gibbs so far this season. Now, with that being said, you have a total of 0 games with less than 10 points. Obviously, this is an elite offense. This is a phenomenal offensive line. Gibbs is the clear RB1 in this. The only possible issue that I have with Jahmyr Gibbs, to be honest with you, is I drafted him aggressively this year thinking we were going to see 5, 6, 7 targets a game. Sadly, the receiving usage really hasn't been to that level. Instead, you're seeing a lot closer to 4-ish targets a week here. But still, obviously, phenomenal offense. Kenneth Walker, you could strongly consider as a tier 1 back as well. Walker's been phenomenal. Here, you actually have the injury earlier in the season skewing the amount of points that Walker scored so far. But despite Walker missing 2 weeks with the injury and have already gone through his bye, he is still the running back 12 in fantasy. The man actually has had a massive role as a receiver. The hope that you have now is maybe with some better matchups after the Niners game this week, all of a sudden Walker can get back to, or more so the Seahawks can get back to having a great offense. And maybe Metcalf coming in as well just creates space underneath for Walker where it's easier to operate against lighter boxes. Breece Hall is obviously a very strong running back as well. Breece has been a running back 1 so far this season. He's the RB7. You've had a very up and down year. The big thing is it's a horrible offense, right? I mean, you even see in a great matchup this week against the Arizona Cardinals, the Jets just completely collapse. But you only have 1 game this year with fewer than 10 carries. And at the same time, you're pretty safely seeing anywhere from 15 to 20 opportunities every week for Breece. And then our last running back in tier 2 is going to be Jonathan Taylor. With Taylor this past week, obviously really good opportunity share where you have 21 carries. You have 4 targets. It's a tough matchup going up against Buffalo. Also, it's a game where Flacco throws 3 interceptions. The issue that you really have with Taylor is the fact that the receiving usage just isn't to the same level of what you have with the running backs that are ahead of him. But of course, you can say maybe that's trending in the opposite direction. Now that you have Flacco under center, he does see 4 targets this past week. But one thing that I'm also taking into consideration with these rest of season rankings, and I know it may sound dumb, but in my mind, there's a big difference between a player that's already through his bye week, such as Kenneth Walker, versus the guy that still has to go through his bye week, such as Breece Hall. Because if you think of us having 4 more weeks until the fantasy football playoffs, if your option's going to be missing one of those, that's 25% of the games. So still having to go through your bye week for the rest of season rankings actually will make a difference, or at least how I rank these guys personally. Going down to our next tier, we're going to be led off with James Cook. James Cook, super consistent option this season. You have 2 games with fewer than 10 fantasy points this year. I mean, this is a running back that very consistently is seeing the rushing touchdowns, which is really funny because obviously a big narrative coming into the season is that James Cook didn't have the ceiling with the rushing touchdowns because of Josh Allen. But no, he has a role in the red zone. I mean, so far this year, James Cook is averaging about a touchdown a game exactly. And also, he's getting some usage as a receiver. It's a great offense. Not really concerned at all with Cook. I'm going over to Chase Brown. Obviously, if you told me, Mason, Chase Brown's usage over the past 2 weeks is going to be the exact thing that you should expect rest of season, I would make an argument that Chase Brown should be a tier 1 running back. If you told me, Mason, where we've been averaging 20 carries a game, where you've been averaging 8 targets a game from Chase Brown over the past 2 weeks with no Zach Moss, that's what to expect going forward. I maybe name 5 guys I'd rather have over Brown. My personal expectation, though, is that while Khalil Herbert is for sure not the starting back, nothing close to it. You can check on these rankings to see that I don't think that. I do think Khalil Herbert probably mixes in the coming weeks to see 20, 30% of the opportunities, very similar to like Dobbins and Edwards that we're going to talk about in just 1 second. I think that's actually a perfect comp as well, though, because Chase Brown's obviously going to have everything as the receiver. Chase Brown's still a must-start running back absolutely every single week regardless. David Montgomery, going to be a must-start running back every week regardless. Again, Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy that I prefer. I think Gibbs is the more electric back at this point. Gibbs has the larger role as the receiver. But Montgomery's touchdowns have still been there, where Montgomery's had a touchdown in every game this season outside of 2 of them, which just gives you such a nice floor in this offense behind this offensive line. Josh Jacobs will be our next guy. Jacobs, if you're looking at the snaps, they have been trending in the wrong direction, where over the past 3 weeks, he's gone down from 67 to 64 to 55% of the snaps played. In reality, I'm not super concerned with this. I still view Jacobs as a running back that should be closing in on anywhere from 15 to 20 opportunities every single week in one of the best offenses in the NFL, and you'll have some usage as a receiver. You actually could see Jacobs dramatically outperform this rest of season if we get some positive touchdown regression, where the man's only had 3 rushing touchdowns this year. And then James Conner will be our next running back. Obviously, we've seen a lot of Trey Benson over the past 2 weeks, and the snaps have gone down for James Conner dramatically. But also over the past 2 weeks, the Cardinals just blew out the Bears and they blew out the Jets. Reality, I think games should be a lot closer for this Cardinals offense going into the future. So in my mind, it's tough to come out here and say that Benson's role's super concerning at this point. And also, Connor actually has been trending upwards with the receiving usage over the past 5 weeks or so. And he has the best fantasy football playoff schedule of any running back in the NFL. Aaron Jones will be our next back. With Aaron Jones, you can make an argument to have him higher in this tier if it wasn't for the uncertainty around the injury that he suffers against Jacksonville. Sounds like it may not be a big deal. Obviously, with Jones, he has been closing in on 20+ opportunities most weeks. It's a decent offense, but at the same time, Darnold definitely has regressed, which obviously has hit the offense on the whole. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I think you have to move Dobbins down a tier in comparison to where he was previously with no Gus Edwards. And that Gus Edwards does come in here. Now, of course, I will reiterate that Dobbins will have everything as the receiver. Dobbins is going to have probably the high value touches at the goal line as well. So Dobbins is for sure a must start running back, at least in most matchups, and for sure the starting running back here in Los Angeles. The concern is if Gus Edwards is coming in to see 30% of this backfield, does that drop Dobbins back closer to what he was through the first month of the season rather than where he was for weeks 6 through 9? Now, our next running back will be DeAndre Swift. Swift was a sell high candidate for us this past week for a couple different reasons, but a big one being if you're looking at the matchups that you have for DeAndre Swift going into the future, it is very concerning. You have a game against the Niners, you have 2 games against the Lions, and you have 2 games against the Vikings. This is an offense that is collapsing at the exact wrong time. I mean, of course, Swift is still seeing the opportunities. I mean, if you're going backwards in time, you have 17, 22, 18, 21, 23, 23 opportunities in this offense. But it looks to be a bad offense, and you have a really, really tough schedule of games in the future. Brian Robinson will be our next back. We keep on going, oh, Brian Robinson's going to be close to returning. Brian Robinson's going to be close to returning. What they should have done is as soon as Brian Robinson had the hamstring injury in week 5, they should have just thrown this dude on the IR to make sure that he was coming back fully healthy. Because we have not seen Brian Robinson play a game with over 50% of the snaps since week 4. Now, I still think that if Brian Robinson were to be fully healthy, I'd probably actually move him ahead of DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins. He may move to the tier above in these rankings based off how good this Washington offense is. It's just tough because Brian Robinson still has to go through the bye week in week 14, and you don't get the guarantee that he plays this week. Isaiah Pacheco obviously will not be playing this week, but I want to reiterate what we typically see is people not acting fast enough in terms of these injured players. Typically, what you actually see with the value over time for these guys that go on the IR is the second that they have an injury, maybe they'll lose 25% of their value. And then every week that goes by that you don't get news about that player, they become less and less and less and less valuable in people's minds, where in reality, that's the exact opposite of what you should do. In reality, the second that that player gets injured, you should drop them down dramatically in your rest of season rankings. And every week that they come closer to returning, they get higher and higher and higher and higher. So even though we've had no news with Pacheco, you can check the rest of season rankings over there on the site. We have consistently moved him up 2 to 3 slots in the running back rankings every single week. And yeah, I mean, there is a chance that he is back late November. So of course, if you were wanting to trade for Pacheco, you kind of have to do so soon before the news comes out. Very similar to what we talked about with McCaffrey about 3 to 4 weeks ago. Now, Tyrone Tracy will be our next option to look at. With Tracy, we still know exactly who he is, right? I mean, obviously, we called him the sell high candidate after the Steelers game, where he drops the monstrous 23 points and looks phenomenal. Since then, he's averaging about 12 points per game. And with Tracy, he's the locked and loaded starter in New York. He's going to have pretty much everything in this backfield. The only drawback with it is, one, he's not really getting much usage as a receiver. Over the past 4 games, the man's looking at 18 total receiving yards. And 2, it's a garbage offense. So if you're averaging like 5 receiving yards a week, you are kind of touchdown or bust here. And in my mind, the Giants offense shouldn't have a ton of touchdowns going into the future. Now, obviously, Chuba Hubbard just freaking shows Germany what a football player looks like this past week. Chuba Hubbard, 25 points against the Giants, looks phenomenal. I have to wave the white flag. I have to throw in the towel. Looks like Jonathan Brooks isn't guaranteed to be anything. I think you have to 100% rank Hubbard as the guy in Carolina going into the future. Miles Sanders gets injured, which really does juice the volume that you have from Hubbard this past week against the Giants, plus the fact that the Panthers are able to win this game. Obviously, the Panthers aren't winning many football games, but you do get the 34 opportunities. But I keep on saying this every week. We've said it. Maybe Jonathan Brooks is back. If Jonathan Brooks comes in after the bye, I don't know if Hubbard's seeing 34 opportunities again. Definitely still the starter here in Carolina. Tony Pollard will be the next name. Looking at Pollard, we've been talking about this for a while, but as soon as you got Spears back in, the volume dramatically dipped. Like going through and looking at the games without Spears over the past 3 weeks or over the past month, you've seen 20, 22, 24, and 31 opportunities. The second that Spears is back, this falls down to 13. Now, in reality, he's probably going to be a little bit in between where he's been with the past month with no Spears and what we saw this past week in a really tough matchup against the Chargers. He's most likely a play based off matchup, but obviously with lowered expectations with Spears coming in and especially taking some usage as a receiver. Now, Ramondre Stevenson will be our next option. With Ramondre, he's helped me win some weeks this year. I have him in the Flock League, but to be completely honest with you, I don't know why I hate this dude. Like, I'm just being honest. It makes no sense. I can't get over it. It seems like every time I play him, he disappoints. You get 20 carries this week, and he gives us 8.7 fantasy points. The main issue is you don't really have the guaranteed involvement as a receiver, while at the same time, it's a very bad offense here in New England. He's just been so up and down this season. Like, we get no consistency with Stevenson. Najee Harris, luckily, he gets there for us with the rushing touchdown this past week. But you have 21 carries for 11 fantasy points. Najee does get banged up a bit. Najee has an absolute brutal schedule for the fantasy football playoffs. It's horrendous. And obviously, we're going to have to monitor the injury that we have with Najee Harris. Rashard White, since you had the injury to Godwin and Evans, has been insane. Like, Rashard White over the past month has had 29, 15, 12, and 19 fantasy points. Now, a big thing with this is, in my mind, it's just super unsustainable. You've had 5 touchdowns over the past month, and those have come from 29 carries and a total of 49 total opportunities, including the receptions. So Rashard White's averaging a touchdown on every 9 touches at this point. So that's going to come down dramatically. Bucky Irving is obviously still getting involved, but the Rashard White receiving usage has given him a relatively decent floor. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Nick Chubb will hopefully be a slightly better option coming out of the bye week. Obviously, the 2 weeks before, you had 16 and 15 carries with no fantasy points because it's a bad offense and a running back that's not really getting any receiving usage. Rico Dowdle, it looks like he is just the straight up dude in Dallas, but the issue is he doesn't look startable with no Dak Prescott. Kareem Hunt looks like an absolute must-start running back for the time being. Just every single week, you get 20-plus touches. But the issue is, if Pacho's back in 2 to 3 weeks, then obviously for the playoffs in particular, Hunt could be a 0. I'm dropping down to our next tier. These are like the desperation plays, but if you were to get an injury in their backfield, they are pretty exciting. Bucky Irving, obviously, I'm not super excited to play this dude. You get the 16 opportunities this week, but before that, you have 10, then 16, then 12, then 16, then 11. I don't necessarily know if you can consistently rely upon Bucky. It's more so that desperation play in the flex based off matchup. But if you were to get an injury to Rashard White, Bucky becomes a must-start name. Travis Etienne looks like he's the starter here in Jacksonville, but frankly, it just simply doesn't matter. I mean, maybe if Bigsby were to be injured for real, then Etienne could be startable, but you can't in a committee at the moment. Raheem Mostert's also a committee back, more so just that premium handcuff option. Obviously, I'll be live streaming after the game tonight if we do need to update this Raheem Mostert ranking. And obviously, we'll be updating the ranking on flogfantasy.com literally every second. Javonte Williams will be the next name. Javonte may have been benched for Audric Estime at this point. I mean, it looks like there's no way you could start Javonte anytime soon. Jonathan Brooks, the dude practices all week in week 9 in full. The dude practices in full all week in week 10, and he's still inactive. Maybe we see him in week 12. But clearly it looks like he is behind Chuba Hubbard with this depth chart. And then going to our last tier, these are players that are primarily just handcuff options. Like maybe Eckler, Madison are a little bit more than that, where they have some standalone value. But looking at like Charbonnet, Algier, Jordan Mason, Braylon Allen, Jalen Warren, Tank Bigsby, Khalil Herbert, every single one of these running backs, I'd say, you know what? I probably don't want to start them if the guy ahead of them in their respective offense is healthy. But if you were to get an injury in their offense, then all of a sudden they probably do become must-start options. But I think that's all I got for you. I really do appreciate you. And of course, if you wanted to check out that free Matthew Stafford pick over there on Underdog, more than less than half a total yard, you can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. Code FLOCK will hook you up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll be getting a free Matthew Stafford pick more than less than half a total yard and a free team review. All you got to do is make sure that you set up an account on flogfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog Fantasy account. That way I'm able to go ahead and credit you with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.